Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Can I have your attention, please? So, I'm going to try to do this without a mic because I have a very soft voice, but I'll try to overcome that and see if I can, if everybody can hear me. So if I need to quiet it down, actually tell me. That's no big deal. So, welcome and thank you very much for your attendance here and your support for the Drew O'Donoghue Fund. We have a pretty exciting day planned.
No refunds either.
Yeah. Was it no refund? Sorry, but so this is almost fitting to the introduction to the speaker. I mean, the world that we live in is a good news, bad news, or a bad news, good news situation. The bad news is that rare cancers and rare diseases, unfortunately and logically, cannot be funded by groups like NIH, pharma companies, etc., and so on. Research is not there and everything else. That's the bad news. The good news is that thanks to you and the Drew O'Donoghue Fund, we're still making huge impacts in this particular rare cancer. The bad news is that because it's such a rare disease, there are so many physicians who have never even been exposed to this, don't even know that this exists. And so the subsequent research and all the work and the care and the successes and those things are also limited. That's bad news. The good news is we found the person, literally in the world, who is focused on this, who has accomplished more with this, and is doing stuff in conjunction with all of us here to make it happen. So every time we have these obstacles, we do have a solution. So it's phenomenal. So it gives me a great honor to introduce a man who is he's a dreamer, and he's an inventor, and he's a doer. He's a practicing doctor out of the University of Michigan, Millie Schembechler Adrenal Cancer Center. And so he's living this at every aspect. He's spoken internationally at the NIH, at institutions around the world. He's published. He's the guy. And we're just so fortunate to have met him. And at this point, he's no longer just the guy. He's part of our family, as are you. But Dr. Hammer is a deeply rooted part of who we are, what we believe in, and the cause that we're leading. And so, without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker this morning, Dr. Gary Hammer.
Thank you, Jerry, for that. Those kind words, and good morning, everybody. Morning. Can you hear me in the back? Yep. Do I talk that loud? As you heard, I'm Gary Hammer, and I direct the University of Michigan Adrenal Cancer Program. And I'm delighted to be here once again with all of you. It's a little different this year for me because, because of the rain. But because I need to fly out a little early to go to the National Cancer Institute at the NIH for a meeting tonight where I serve as an advisor to the Institute, so I apologize for not being able to stay and show you how poorly I play golf this year. So some of you I know relatively well, and some of you are new friends as of today. So maybe a brief introduction is worthwhile about what we do and how we got here, if that's okay. First and foremost, as during the first outing, July 28th, 2014, we're here to honor Drew, to support Sean, Lisa, and Patrick, and to continue to see Drew's legacy through to a resounding yes. Yes to making a difference on behalf of others struggling with the diagnosis of and treatments for adrenal cancer, and yes to a cure. I have such profound respect for you all, and I truly remain forever in awe of your ability to reach out and make a difference. So why am I here and why Michigan? I know Jerry said a few words, but let me just tell you a little more. I recall at the 2014 outing, I spoke about team, and I spoke about the resonance I felt when meeting Coach Vogel. Because for me, my journey into the world of adrenal cancer, as Jerry knows, ironically started with a coach. Bo Schembechler, the Michigan football icon. A number of years earlier, I had the distinct honor of being recruited to the University of Michigan, ultimately to be named the Millie Schembechler Professor of Adrenal Cancer in honor of Bo's wife, who also died of this disease. And I recall being at your house, Sean and Lisa, the night before the golf outing that first year, and at the time we all agreed that night that there remained a profound need to better coordinate efforts around the country, around the world, to accelerate genetic research and to create new effective treatments to cure this disease. And we agreed that night to build the team. Coach?
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm here to tell you that the team is now built and it is time to play ball. So in just a few short years, it's evolved such that Michigan has become the hub for the adrenal cancer community around the world, writing textbooks, holding international conferences and meetings, and coordinating the collaborative efforts with colleagues around the world who share the optimism that a cure is around the corner for this dreadful disease. And as you'll see, that's interacting with Memorial Sloan Kettering, Harvard, the Mayo Clinic, and as you'll see in a minute, around the world to cure this disease. And so now, today, this year, it's time. It's time to do something, and to do something big. So today I want to talk about leverage. I want to talk about the power of community and the power of investing in people, specifically our young minds. So that's what we're going to do for the next couple of minutes. For those of you who are new to this event and who have never heard of adrenal cancer, I remind you, or will tell you right now, that adrenal cancer affects very young people, and even the unborn, and then those in the prime of life. And like Drew, most patients ultimately develop metastatic disease that spreads quickly. Historically, most treatments don't work, hadn't worked. Notice the past tense, hadn't worked, and the only approved drug for this disease remains a derivative of DDT, the pesticide that single-handedly ignited the environmental movement. We all agree, do agree, that that needs to change. We know, as Jerry mentioned, that for a rare disease, any rare disease really, the return on investment for the government, for industry in terms of number of lives saved, or revenue generation, is understandably simply too slim. So a cure is not coming from there. We know that for a rare disease like adrenal cancer, it's you. And it really is you. You who are advocating in Congress, you who are raising awareness, you who are raising funds, you who are setting the agenda, you who are finding a cure, you who are thereby changing the world. And I mean that deeply because I've lived it now for the last decade. So 2 stories then, about leverage, community, and brilliant young minds. Laboratories at universities are akin to small startups. They're populated by brilliant young minds. Young, brilliant, creative, hungry undergraduate and graduate students, medical students. And my lab is no different, with the caveat that we work on a rare disease. And at the start, we were getting by in a shoestring budget, funded in part by modest funds from grateful patients and families. Couldn't get a grant from the NIH, et cetera, for the reasons I mentioned about return on investment. So we got to work on trying to understand the genetics of adrenal cancer. The challenge was that doing that science for a rare disease requires the establishment of collaborations around the world, even just to gather enough tumor samples, enough patients to study the disease, let alone treat it. Okay? So we forged ahead in the lab and trying to build a network around the globe. Now, while the formation of our international cooperative group has been in the works for a few years, I'm here to say that just this year, we formally and legally have initiated the American, Australian, Asian Adrenal Alliance, or A5, that unites the world of adrenal cancer researchers and clinicians in the cloud and in real time, and allows us to leverage and negotiate with industry, leverage and negotiate with government agencies around the globe. This is big news. I wasn't looking for a clap. I wasn't looking for that. I was trying to think about what I wanted to add to that, which is, you're wondering, well, where's Europe in that? Well, Europe also has an international cooperative group that started at the University of Michigan, but is in Europe, called ENSAT, the European Network for the Study of Adrenal Tumors. These two groups are interdigitated in real time and in space and in the cloud, because the same international networking program was built for both of them, so that they link up seamlessly, so the world is connected in the adrenal cancer space. So, all right, back to my stories. So, predating A5, a talented student in the laboratory had just figured out that a particular gene, a hormone, IGF, insulin-like growth factor, was markedly increased in adrenal cancer. Like it was 100 times higher than it was supposed to be. So we had a hunch this was important. And drug companies, it turns out, had drugs that blocked that pathway, that blocked IGF. But they wouldn't let anyone study these drugs in such a rare disease, for the reasons that you've heard a few times. Well, finally, after years of pleading, we got some drug to test in human adrenal cancer cells in a dish, in mice. And we proved that it worked to shrink adrenal cancer tumors in the dish, and when we took human adrenal cancer and put it in mice, the tumor shrunk. Well, finally, as our network emerged internationally, after a couple more years, we were finally able to convince industry leaders to allow us to test these drugs in not one, not two, but ultimately 3 international trials for adrenal cancer, specifically in patients. So these trials were international, and importantly, they were funded by pharma. That is leverage. That's leverage of a team that was funded solely at the start by family and friends and advocates for adrenal cancer around the world. That's leverage. Leverage of the team. So what did we see? Well, we saw profound results. We even saw complete resolution of adrenal cancer metastasized to the lung, like it was gone in the lung. These were patients who had failed every chemotherapy that you can imagine a patient would be treated with, and then they were on drug, and there was complete resolution. There was a but. But because the drug only worked in 10% of our patients, the FDA and the drug companies called the trials a total failure. And all efforts ceased completely. We were told that only when we can predict who will respond can we move forward. You see, the IGF was upregulated, was 100 times higher than it's supposed to be in 85% of patients. It's important, and we proved it, as I mentioned, through a variety of ways. But the drug only worked in 10% of them, and the question is, well, why? And until we could prove that, they weren't going to let anyone get this treatment. Until we figured it out. So that's where things stood until now. So, in the interim, over the last couple of years, the genetic work grew. to a collaborative project that culminated last year in a landmark, highly publicized paper with over 200 authors. 200 authors, all of them in the adrenal cancer space around the globe. Collaborating together from the A5 team, the NSAT team, the work cataloged the entire genetic, remember the Human Genome Project? Well, this was the Adrenal Cancer Genome Project. 100 adrenal cancers from around the world, okay, sequenced the entire landscape, and this work points the way to the future, to new targeted therapies. And I'm going to tell you how. This was a multi-institutional, multinational, multi-million-dollar project funded, this time, by the governments. Okay. A study that began, again, as a small project by one young student with support from grateful patients and families. The NCI, National Cancer Institute, where I'm going later today, finally saw the power of team, of this team. Now that's a good return on investment. Story 2 is about a patient, her friend, and courage. A few years ago, soon after Riley was diagnosed with adrenal cancer, she set out on an extraordinary journey to do her best to develop new treatments for the very disease that she had. With a lead compound and one of these new adrenal targets in sight, she first started working in my laboratory. This is a bit atypical for the doctor-patient relationship, I guess, but such is the nature of real life being lived and real life with disease. With the encouragement of U of M, she actually then founded a company and got a new trial drug into patients within 24 months. This is almost unheard of in the drug industry space. 24 months, concept to patients. Developed by a patient. With support, again, from family and friends and donations. This promising work continues on this drug today in patients, and stay tuned. And what you'll hear about later tonight from Deepika Mohan, who has joined us in the room right there in the back. Deepika is a talented young trainee in the lab, and she'll tell you more about this, but she'll be talking about the genetics that we've gleaned from this large genetic project, and how we can group all of the mutations of adrenal cancer into 3, shall we say, groups. 3 groups of adrenal cancer patients that behave differently to each other than the 3 groups, despite the fact that each group has a bunch of mutations in it in different patients. And that, we believe, is going to point to new treatments for those groups. Specifically, she'll talk about how this work has informed us why, how, and who is predicted to respond, for example, to the IGF blocking drug. Okay? We think we have figured that out. Now, she may not talk about that specifically, but for that matter, the genetics can inform us about other new drugs that target ACC as well. That's what the genetic will do for us, and so game is on, Coach.
Ready to play.
These stories, to me, are the definition of leverage. Work done by gifted young minds, made possible in part by impassioned patients, families, and friends like you all, who have worked hard to advance advocacy, raise awareness, and funding for research. I am truly convinced, Sean, Lisa, Patrick, and all of you ever before, that the team which is assembled here will win. So I'll close just with a couple comments. I agree with famed cultural anthropologist Margaret Mead, who said, and you will know this quote, many of you, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And indeed, we are winning as we translate genetics into personalized care for adrenal cancer patients. Folks, we are at a tipping point. You may ask, how do we keep momentum like this alive? It's simple. Stay engaged. Stay engaged. We will focus on the team, and we will invest in people. Know that you are making a profound difference today. With your help, we will win. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.
Ask everybody to stay for a picture. I just want everybody to stay there for a picture.
I can take
Which
Right here.
I can
Okay.
take questions if people want to ask questions, or it's up to you, Jerry and Sean.
Well, we have a couple pictures we'd just like to take, and then we'll get into questions, because we want to share this socially, and,
You go.
thank you.
Go right to the middle of the room and stay right exactly where you are. Not yet. Go ahead.